Hey guys, welcome to Toomey Presents. Today we need to talk about James Bond, because Amazon has recently gained control of James Bond's creative direction. Now that doesn't mean that the Broccoli family are completely out of James Bond, they still have their ownership stake. But what it means is that Amazon paid $1 billion to be able to control the next script and the way forward for James Bond, what stories will come out. That's what they paid for. So people have been all over social media and all over YouTube saying, this is the end of quality control. This is the end of James Bond as we know it. There goes the death of James Bond. But I have a perspective on this. So this is going to be a quite longer form video. I'm going to have natural breaks in here to break them into segments. So I hope you stick with me for this video. But to truly comprehend where Bond may be going, we need to break it down Bond by Bond. So let's do that right now. We will look at all the Bonds over time. We'll put Roger Moore over here, Sean Connery there, George Lazenby's in here somewhere. There's George Lazenby. So we'll break down all the Bonds and we'll have a look at what each Bond brought to the table. Timothy Dalton, very underrated Bond. Pierce Brosnan, very underrated Bond as well. I'm just going to break these down like this and then we're going to go through them all. So naturally, we're going to start off with Sean Connery. Probably the most iconic Bond. Now that is arguable because people do prefer Roger Moore as well. People prefer Daniel Craig as well. So you have all these movies with Connery. And for the sake of this video, I am not including Never Say Never Again, because that was pretty much a remake of Thunderball. So we're not going to count that one. And likewise, we're not going to count David Niven's Casino Royale. We're not going to count that. So, Connery for me is the definitive Bond, mainly because my favourite Bond movie of all time is Goldfinger. Now, people can say what they want to say about which Bond is the best, but it's almost like Bond has been out of his element for a very long time, at least since the Roger Moore and the Sean Connery days. So when you look at Bond, you look at it as like he's a character out of time, almost like Judi Dench says in the Daniel Craig movies, you're a relic of the past. Now, when they were making the Bond movies, they were set in the 1950s, and it just made sense. So you really have that essence of Bond and, you know, Spectre and Blofeld and like all these big enemies over time. Goldfinger, like there is so many movies to draw from, but also you have to keep in mind these came from books initially, so these came from Ian Fleming. And when you look at the Bond franchise, whether you say George Lazenby wasn't that great a Bond, whatever, you have to look at it as each Bond brought something different to the table. Even Timothy Dalton brought something different to the table. Now I think Timothy Dalton was a very highly underrated Bond, but I understand to some people that wasn't their Bond. Likewise, people preferred Sean Connery and didn't really prefer Roger Moore. So I understand Roger Moore's catalogue of Bond movies are somewhat debatable whether people prefer these or Connery. And there's people now in the modern generation who prefer the Daniel Craig movies, or even the Pierce Brosnan. I've seen people getting nostalgic for Pierce Brosnan. But do you understand what I'm saying about this franchise? There has been multiple iterations of Bond, and that's how we need to look at it, because the Amazon phase of this will be yet another iteration. Now, you might say, but they have complete control over it. They're going to go back to Casino Royale. They're going to remake all the movies. It will be a new iteration of Bond, and that's what I'm saying. That's how we need to look at it. Now, obviously, people who have not seen No Time to Die, this is going to be a spoiler for you guys, but obviously Bond died at the end of this movie. That is a big spoiler if you haven't seen it. But I feel like that was a nice little bow on top of the Daniel Craig ones, but it could also be significant in terms of what it signifies. Obviously, Bond has died in that movie, and it could mean the death of the cinematic, like, Bond-verse, or it could mean the start of something different. Now, there are a lot of speculation out there online of what Amazon's going to do with it. Are they going to do Jane Bond? I don't think they will do that, mainly because Amazon just paid $1 billion. I'm pretty sure they want to see a return on that investment. So I don't think they're going to do Jane Bond, Plus they have Moneypenny there. If they were going to do anything, they would use Moneypenny. But when you look at Bond overall, you need to understand no company likes to lose money. No company likes to bet on a losing asset. And I'm pretty sure any studio, whether it was Amazon, Disney, whoever bought it, would have known that you're buying James Bond, and you know who you're getting when you buy James Bond, and you understand the core audience of that character. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't have a woman Bond character. I mean, we have other 000 agents that we have rarely seen. We obviously have Moneypenny. We have M if we want to do a prequel to Judi Dench's M. There are a lot of different variables in here that would make sense in terms of a woman 000 agent. But to alter James Bond would create too much backlash, and I don't think that's what Amazon need. Now, everyone has knocked Amazon this past week saying they don't understand the character, they do not understand, they're going to ruin Bond, there goes the end of Bond. Can we just take a moment to remember this is the studio that makes The Boys. This is the studio that makes Fallout. This is the studio that makes Reacher, I believe. I think they make Reacher. But, you know, they are essentially making TV shows that show that they can get a property and understand it and adopt it for a modern audience. Now, what does that mean exactly? Who knows? We are not sure where this is going to go. But it does mean that I have some trust in Amazon, and we will talk about that in the next segment. So this is the end of segment 1. Now we're going to go on to the next segment after this short break, so I hope you'll stick with me. Welcome back. So in the previous segment we talked about where Bond has come from, the multiple iterations of Bond, and you have to look at Bond as something that has been for a very long time now almost an afterthought. He is an afterthought in his own genre, and this new iteration of Bond from Amazon has the potential to fall into that same thing. Now, what does that mean? Well, even though I may have liked Daniel Craig as Bond, I know a lot of people were like, well, it's Bond, but it's not Bond. It's like a different take of Bond. And it feels like he is a relic of the past, as Judi Dench's M says in the Daniel Craig series. He is a relic of the Cold War. And everything has tried to tell Bond from a modern perspective. Even the Pierce Brosnan era tried to do that. And when I'm talking about he's an afterthought in his own genre, we have so many film franchises out there right now that do a better job of telling the spy thriller or even the spy satirical take or whatever than Bond does. I'm looking mainly at Mission Impossible. That has done a very good job. I'm looking at Jason Bourne. That's done a very good job. I'm even looking at Reacher, Jack Reacher. Very good job once again. And that's only if you're taking the serious takes. There are a lot more out there in the action genre. And if you go for satirical, we have Johnny English. I mean, we've had Austin Powers for a very long time. And you even have Kingsman. So, you know, there is a lot of spy movies and spy TV shows out there to draw from, that it almost seems like Bond isn't needed at this point. So it is very hard to sell how Bond can be modernized. Now, Bond as a theatrical cinema experience, I think Amazon's going to retain that. I think that's something that they will look heavily at because they know there is money potential in cinematic Bond. People will go to the cinema and see James Bond. But their investment may come full circle from making a Moneypenny TV show, or a Spectre TV show, or a Blofeld prequel, or something like that. There are a lot of avenues they could employ, and, you know, this is the studio that makes shows like Reacher. This is the studio that makes things like The Boys, you know. They have a track record, and whether you like them or hate them, you have to admit they do have a track record that brings an audience, and the audience is mainly happy. Look at Homelander. He's very politically incorrect. Now, people have said they're going to woke up Bond. That I don't think is the case, because they know they will lose and alienate the audience that will go to the cinema and watch a Bond movie. And I believe that claim is false. But obviously I have to look at that as potentially it could happen. I mean, we're talking about the modern era here. But I don't see Amazon spending $1 billion on a franchise to get creative control just to say, oh, we were going to lose a 900 million of that. You know, I don't see it happening. I think they will say, you know what? Bond is Bond. We need to keep Bond as he is. We need to keep it as cinematic, and we need to keep him British, because I've heard that big argument online this past few weeks. Oh, they're going to make Bond US now, Bond whatever. There is so much British culture in the Bond franchise. MI6, answers to the Crown, you know, there is so much there that you cannot just pick up Bond and move into America. Now, you could have, oh, he answers to the king or whatever, but then, or the president, I should say. But you understand? I don't think you can do that. I think you need to keep Bond as British. And there is a big reason for that, because Bond is British through and through. And I think, yes, you can have different iterations of, okay, maybe characters come in from different places around the world, but then you can build them in like a prequel or a TV show. Like Spectre could be an interesting one, because that's worldwide. We really could see the origins of Spectre. You know, there is so many ways to do this without alienating the core fundamental fan base of James Bond. And likewise, I think there is a big potential for really driving home, let's go back to Casino Royale. Let's start again. Let's sign on a Bond that's maybe doesn't look too young, but he may be his late 20s, maybe early 30s. And then you let that Bond play Bond for the next 25 years. That could be where they go. And then you can have every movie, you create a movie every 2 years. Film them like Cameron was filming Avatar. Film them back to back, release them in 2 year spans, and then just do a cinematic universe that works, but also don't insert elements that don't work. I mean, you have to look at Marvel as the template. Marvel has created something that is a cinematic universe, and to an extent, you could at least say there was at least some level of coherent storytelling. Now, I know people say the current storytelling with multiverse just doesn't work, but everything from about Iron Man to Endgame had a ironed out plan. That's what they could do with Bond. They have the reference there in the books. They have the reference to go back and say, Fleming told it like this, how can we do an adaptation of this that satisfies the book, but also brings a take to Bond that hasn't been seen before? As I said, Cold War, that could be an interesting one. And likewise, if you go for a younger Bond, then he could even play it for even longer. You know, that character could be 70 and do Commander Bond. There is a lot of ways to capitalize on a Bond that is younger and grows into the role. I don't think it will be Henry Cavill. I don't think it'll be Tom Hardy. I don't even think it'll be Harry Styles, to be honest. But I think whoever they get to play the new Bond has to bring an aura to it that really delivers, because this is going to be highly watched by a lot of the film industry. Amazon get that. And when we look at Bond, they do not want to ruin something they just paid $1 billion for. They do not. Everyone wants to make money in this scenario. And likewise, they do not want to alienate a fan base, because we've seen what happens when a movie studio will make a movie for the sake of making a movie without quality control or understanding the core fundamental of the character. So I think we have to look at Bond as Amazon need to do the first movie. From there, we will be able to tell. Now, I've seen people talk about DC coming out and making a Superman. It's basically the first Superman standalone movie since Man of Steel. So you have that, and people are like, oh, the suit looks terrible and this and that. I'm looking at it as maybe the suit needs to be earned. Maybe that's a second or third movie iteration. Maybe that's something that comes after time. But I have faith in James Gunn because I watched Guardians of the Galaxy. I understand what he's getting into. So I watched Brightburn. I kind of get what he might be doing, but I have to watch the movie to understand how I feel about it. But do you understand what I'm saying? There is so many different takes of Bond in spy, not like just Bond the character, in spy thrillers, in spy comedies, in whatever. Bond has been endlessly referenced, and he is an afterthought and a joke in his own genre. People didn't like Daniel Craig. Instead of a vodka martini, he's ordering Heinekens. Like, you know, there is problems with the last iteration of Bond. But when you look at how Bond moves forward into the future, that's going to be the next segment, because I am going to talk in depth about where I think Bond needs to go next. So I hope you'll stick with me. This is the last ad break of the video, and then I'm going straight through to the end. So please stick with me, and I'll catch you in 2-3 seconds. Welcome back. So, the future of Bond. What does the future hold for Bond? What could we see from this Amazon deal? Now, I hinted at it earlier in the video. We could see the Bond cinematic universe. And what does that mean? I think Bond is the cinema one. That's the big draw. Everyone knows you put that in the cinema, that's your Avengers, essentially. But that doesn't mean you can't have Moneypenny. You can have a Moneypenny TV show, you can have an MTV show, you can have whatever you want as an Amazon company. You can have different iterations. You can have a prequel to Spectre, you can have Blofeld. There's ways to build it. But it has to be done in a way that's smart. It can't alienate the fan base, otherwise people will give up on it. We've seen how people just gave up on Star Wars after a time. We've seen how people are essentially giving up on the MCU. They need to quality control this. And everyone can be happy. See, this is the thing. Bond fans can be happy. They just have to understand the core fundamental of Bond and understand what brings Bond's audience in. It's because he's a product of time. I think they need to put him back in his element. Put him back in the 60s. Do a period piece that he is in the 60s, Cold War era. That is where Bond thrives. And that is something that would work because people will go and suspend their disbelief watching Bond. Now, as I said, you can have Moneypenny in there. You can have all these different elements. You can build side characters. Keep in mind, Guardians of the Galaxy was not part of, like, technically it was part of the MCU, but it wasn't really connected to the MCU until more later films. Obviously, they tried to keep it separate as long as possible. And there were elements from the other films in there, but it wasn't as obvious when you were watching it. So when you look at how Bond can be done, you could have it as like, oh, if you watched Moneypenny, you would know. But if you haven't watched Moneypenny, you can just watch Bond. I think they need to do it in a way that you can go into this thing without watching everything else. And that's what I think Marvel's needed to do. That's what all these cinematic universes need to do. Have standalones, but have them done in a way that works. And that doesn't mean just go back and remake everything. It just means that if you understand what people want to see in 2025, people don't want to do homework. People don't want to sit there and say, I need to watch 25 Bond movies or however many Bond movies are here. I don't need to watch all those to understand the next iteration of Bond. See, the good thing about Bond is that they kept recasting Bond every couple of years. And likewise, it kept the character fresh for each generation. But sometimes, to keep the character fresh, you need to go back to the beginning. Sometimes you need to go back to Dr. No. Sometimes you need to go back to Casino Royale. Now, obviously, we had Casino Royale with Daniel Craig, but I would say, let's explore Bond. Let's see where he comes from. Obviously, we saw a bit of that in Skyfall, but we need to see how that grows over the next couple of movies. We need to see how that grows in TV. I would like to see a Bond origin story, see him in the army, see where he got his wings. That could be interesting. There are ways to do this in a way that keeps the core fundamentals of Bond, but also gives the audience something they haven't seen before. And that doesn't mean to just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. People know what Bond is. People know who Bond is. People know his acquaintances. People know he gets his tech from Q. People know all this stuff about Bond. But what I'm talking about is you can grow the character. Something that hasn't been done in these movies, because obviously they draw from the books, and as they should do, they should draw from the books. But please have him drink a vodka martini. Don't have him drinking Heinekens in the movies. Stick to the core fundamentals. There are other ways to capitalize. The audience will pay to go and see a good Bond movie. And you have to understand that people want to see Bond. People want to go and have an experience at the cinemas and say, I saw that James Bond movie. I think when they released No Time to Die, the reason that did so badly was because we were in a different era. Obviously, we went through a period where no one could go to the cinemas. So that's why I feel we didn't see the true potential of No Time to Die. But that doesn't mean that they should just give up on cinemas. Likewise, I think they need to double down on the cinemas. I think they need to put more in the cinemas, and then you can put it on Amazon Prime later, but keep it in the cinemas as long as possible. That's where the money is. That's where the audience are. That's where the audience want to go and say, I bought my ticket and I went and saw that new James Bond movie. Now, people will say, but Netflix and eBay, I can get it from anywhere. Yes, you can. That's obvious. But people will pay for a cinematic experience. Put Bond in cinemas and people are like, yeah, I could watch it at home and my screen's pretty big, but I want to watch it on that big screen. That's what it's about. That's why people go to the cinemas. It's not because they can have the experience on their smartphone on the bus if they want, but they want the experience of Bond. They want the experience of a cinema. They want the experience of what are the other fans feeling. Part of what made Endgame special was because I am Iron Man, the click, and it's like everyone screams. Like I'm getting goosebumps right there thinking about it. You have to have the audience interaction with it. And with Bond, there is almost no bigger character in terms of across multiple movies than James Bond. Look at this franchise and look, maybe, I mean, who is there? There's maybe only Doctor Who in terms of TV, that's close, but in terms of a cinematic storytelling of one character, does anyone really come close to Bond in terms of the amount of movies and the amount of how long it's been there? Maybe Star Wars, maybe Star Wars in all fairness, but this is money, and this is really where I think Amazon are not going to mess it up. They understand the core fundamentals of Bond, I think, and that is a big I think, because I don't know where their heads are with this. I don't know if they're going to, they may very well make it, oh, we're going to go Jane Bond, we're going to go Idris Elba's, they could go any direction they want. But as I said, I think there is more money potential to get a younger Bond, not too young, but someone who can play the character for the next 25 years, film 3 back to back and do, the first 3 movies, film them all back to back, then have a break of 3-4 years in between, let that actor go and do other stuff, and then film the next 3 and go back to back again. Let's do another 3. And then they go and do that other stuff for a couple of years. And that's how you do it. I think they could really make potential out of that. And they could also do stuff like invest in other characters, side characters, show the backstory of M, show how MI6 started, show where the concept of 00 agents came from. These are the things that people want to see, and this is the stuff that people want. I mean, we saw in GoldenEye, Sean Bean was 006. I want to see that. Where did 006 go wrong? Do a prequel to GoldenEye. These are the things that I would be, as a Bond fan, I would want to see where did certain things go wrong. Sympathy for the devil works. It kind of makes you feel like, Joker did that very well. Not the second one, but the first one. You kind of want to see where it all went wrong. But that's the thing. I think we need to really look at, is Amazon really going to mess it up? Or are they going to say, I just spent a silly amount on the Bond franchise. Yes, to Amazon, it's only it's a parking ticket. I get it. $1 billion to them is almost nothing. But Amazon are not going to say, we don't want to make money. Likewise, they're going to say, we want to make a lot of money with Bond. We want to make not trillions, but, multiple billions with Bond. $1 billion, I don't think they're going to mess it up. I think they're going to bring in the people they need to bring in, the writers they need to bring in, the directors they need to bring in. I've seen so many different takes on this. Like, Amazon have a lot of people under their banner at the moment in terms of directors, story writers, so on. I think they can get it right, but they need to get the right people in the right places to tell the right movie with the right actor. There's a lot of variables here, and if they mess any of those up, it can be salvaged, but it's very hard to salvage it when a fan base turns on it. And they have to make sure the fan base doesn't turn on it, which is why I don't think they're going to wake it up. Thanks for joining me for this video. I know it's been a longer one, and I'm sorry there was multiple app breaks in here, but I needed some way to break up the content, and that's why I haven't done much overlay in this, but I hope you've enjoyed this content, and I'll put an end screen at the end of some of my favorite Bond movies. I talked about it. They do change from time to time, but I mean, at the moment, these seem to be the ones I tend to think about. Hope you watch that video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace, and comment down below if you have a take on this. Thanks for joining.